Hello and welcome to Myth Informed. I'm your host, Brian Edward. I'm going solo today, and we do have a guest for you, which I will introduce in a second. But I wanted to thank everybody for donating to our legal fund. To date, we've raised over $20,000, and I think we might be approaching 25. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sean. But we really, really appreciate everyone that's donated to this. It really means a lot to us. And just if you're not aware of this or you weren't sure, what we're doing is initiating some legal action against the theater that was supposed to host the Minds IRL event, and that was the Broadway Theater of Pitman in New Jersey. So ultimately, we got deplatformed from that theater 12 days before the event was supposed to take place. We had well over 400 tickets sold by that point, people flying in from Canada, all across the United States, a couple people from Europe. So we have an enormous amount of speakers coming in that we're paying the flights for, and there's a lot of customers that are coming that have booked hotels and are making a trip out of this. And then to lose your venue 12 days before the event, I mean, it's catastrophic. So not only would we lose a ton of money, but all the people that we've promised this event to are out all of this time and their money. So ultimately, thanks to Sean and Fritz, who really went out. They did heroics. So they flew out to New Jersey the week before. So this is 7 days before the event was supposed to start, or 8 days, and combed every theater. So Sean said he had a list of 180 possible venues. I think one of them was actually a U-Haul storage place, right, which was preferable than to having cancel the event. But anyways, we were able to secure a new venue. Now, the new venue cost a lot more, but we're able to do it. So one of the reasons that we're seeking damages from the theater is our costs went way up for this. So we had a theater that cost a lot more. We lost a lot in ticket sales where people were requesting refunds saying, you know what, I'm just not sure this event is going to happen. And I can see where they're coming from, because we were unsure too. We were just working really, really hard to get that theater. And we knew we could do something, but some of the option B's and C's, our C's and D's, were not so good. So we do have damages that we think are owed to us from the Broadway Theater in the 5 digits. So we really appreciate you guys chipping in to do that, because we do have to set a bit of a precedent. I think businesses need to learn a little bit to handle the crazy political culture that we're in. We're in a time where people call and they'll say anything. They'll make up lies. Oh, you're hosting pedophiles. You're hosting Nazis. This is a Nazi training camp. Things like this. And I think there was a time in America where these kind of things, it would have been a bunch of whack jobs, or companies wouldn't have done anything. But in these days, some companies are saying, nope, we're so risk averse that we're going to cave completely on any kind of moral standing and just deplatform people based on the whims of extremists. And it's if we let extremists, and wherever direction they're coming from, whatever side, control the culture, we're in big, big trouble. So we really appreciate this. We think that we can send a message. We think that we can set a precedent, and it's because you guys were that generous that really makes it possible. So thank you so much. I can't begin to thank everyone for that donation. So moving on. So we have a guest today, Desi-Rae Thinking, who happened to attend the Minds IRL event. I did not know who she was, although I did meet her outside in the green room. We were outside over with this place overlooking the river, and we were both going to the door to go back in, and I just kind of waited and let her open the door and walk through. And then I asked her, hey, can we just redo that? And she's like, yeah. And we both walked back in. I walked in, opened the door for her, and she came through. It was actually a lot of fun to replay that. I wish I would have got to talk to you more, and then I found out you were a YouTuber. And so, Desi-Rae, you got into YouTube. I know that your tagline seems to be, oh my God, what am I doing? Right? Before everything. And I guessed at this, at some point you just started giving your opinion to the internet, and then you at some point thought, wow, people are listening to me. This is going to get out there. oh my God, what am I doing? Am I wrong or is it something else?
That's entirely correct. I was like, I'm about to. Well, I felt pressure to not say certain things, which is why I started my channel because I was fighting within myself the urge to be the outspoken person that I am. And so I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? But I'm gonna do it anyway because I wanted to do it, but I knew that some people might not like what I had to say.
So, was it because you were putting your opinions out on the internet that you're like, oh my God? Or was it the subjects that you discuss? Because you talk about a lot of socio-cultural issues. Would you have said that if we were talking about music?
Oh no, it was definitely the subject. I have two other YouTube channels actually. One I don't really update, one's about art and one's about crypto. And I would not have started those videos with, oh my God, what am I doing? Because I wouldn't expect there to be much backlash from what I'm saying. When it comes to certain ideas, I think that they're much more benign. I think thoughts are benign. However, people extrapolate them out to how they can affect the rest of society. And so they want to stop it at its root. And so you can be very dangerous when you're saying certain things to certain people. So I think it definitely has to do with my subject matter. My first couple of videos were about how much it was. My first video was titled "I'm sick of identity politics." And so that's kind of where it started. I was very tired of people assuming to know what I think because of how I look. And I also wasn't very amused or agreed with a lot of the ideas around race and like I guess oppression, the kind of oppression victim narrative stuff. And also a very important topic at the time when I started my channel was all the media trashing Trump all the time and just how I saw society beginning to shift in terms of what's the correct opinion to have in like the mainstream media and I don't know, when you're out with people and they just assume that you're mostly democratic, people would assume you are. I didn't get that from anywhere else. I'm also in New York, and so the kind of people that I was interacting with tended to be self-described progressives.
Would
Yeah.
you get that sometimes in person, where you're having dinner or you're talking or wherever you are, and they would say, "Well, as a black person, you would know this the best. Donald Trump is X, Y, Z." Would you get that your opinions assumed by your skin color?
I wouldn't get it in the way you just described. It was more like people would just continue talking as if I already agreed with what they said. So no one would be like, as a black person, da da da. They would just like rant against Trump and then like not ask me if I agree with them. It was kind of just like implied that I already agreed. So how I would describe it.
Okay. And where, as far as identity politics, like where have you run into this? You've mentioned, I'm not sure like how far out of school you are, because some of your videos you're talking about taking classes. But where have you run into identity politics in your experience the most?
I am still in school. I went to college when I started. I was out of college. I was like working at the time actually, and then I'm back in college. I'm back in school again for grad school. I definitely encounter it with professors. It's the same thing I was just describing, where they will just say something, and I guess they're not always assuming that everyone else thinks the way they think, but they know that they can say their opinions and that's considered okay. Whereas I don't really hear the opposite side except online. I mostly hear it online, and so you can say certain things more the what people would call the left side, the left wing viewpoint of US, but also around the world. People can say their opinions out loud. So that included in the classroom, also just in the media, say like the New York Times, or what people consider like what my family members would watch on the TV, like CNN, for example. So that's what I mean.
So you grew up in Jamaica, right? And you came to the United States when you were 17. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, good.
That was why I came for college. Yeah, that was in 2010.
Okay, very good. And would you describe yourself as conservative, or how would you describe your political affiliation or views if you had to if you
I
had to put that label on?
I really try not to put that label on. I will tell you what other people call me. I've been called liberal and I've been called conservative. I have never been called progressive or leftist. So you can take from that what you will.
Okay.
That's what other people call me.
Now, in school, then, is there a sense that you feel like you can't speak your mind, or are there other people with views that are similar to yours that feel like they can't speak up?
I definitely think that there are people with views that are similar to mine who feel as if they can't speak up. I think I'm more outspoken than the average person, so it's more that I don't think it's worth it. That's why I usually don't say certain things when I someone like I was doing a marketing class and they were talking about the Gillette ad actually like right when it came out, and one of the students like said something and I thought about responding. It was something about black people in the US. And I just thought about responding and I was like, it's just not worth it. I don't want to say anything. But I think I could handle that, but I definitely think that there are people who would be less likely to say anything because they want to avoid confrontation, or maybe they're even afraid of their professor, or I think the school I'm at now isn't as liberal as the college that I went to, but I still would just avoid it due to the possible confrontations that it might
So
cause.
really, the confrontation and the negative consequences would be more social, because there was a good study that came across Twitter. I was checking out. National Review did it, that says that the grading, like let's say that you were writing an essay and that was on, I don't know, something like white privilege or toxic masculinity, the things like critical theory that is very, very debatable, that people weren't actually getting docked to grades, or that it was like, less than zero point 0.1 on a 4-point scale. So it was not all that significant, but it was the social aspect that might be more. Would you agree with that, or what was your experience?
So you're saying that their grades wouldn't be affected, or you
Yeah.
are saying that their
No,
grades would be affected?
their grades were affected, although very, very small. So it wasn't statistically significant, and it was a very small amount. So the risk would be more social than grades. So this is according to the National Review.
I would take that with a grain of salt because I wouldn't trust that most people can hold themselves to that high of a standard where they don't allow their biases to come through. So with professors, I wouldn't trust what you just said. I would be very cautious with thinking that a professor can separate their grading my paper and their personal belief.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's the risk, and that's what a lot of people are worried about. And I suppose it would depend, depending on how ideologically biased a person was. So it's hard to say. That was according to the review, but the social circumstances, the self censorship, they were saying there was no doubt that their study says that there was a ton of self censoring, and that seems like just the antithesis of what college is supposed to be. That you're supposed to be blurting out ideas, and then somebody will counter you, and you're like, yeah, maybe I didn't think that through, and that with everybody talking, you really can get enriched.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I really love learning and knowledge and getting educated, but I don't like necessarily the structured social institutions, meaning most universities that we attend to receive that education. And I think it's a travesty, absolute travesty, that educational institutions that are supposed to be the forebearers of um, enlightenment in terms of seeking knowledge and pursuing truth are being co-opted by ideologues. Um, I think that I'm very pro learning. I'm very pro science. I do think that we can always take into account the fact that even when people are claim that they are pursuing truth, they might not be. They may be biased. I think that you must expect that to happen, and that's why you have systems in place to try and diminish that effect. But nevertheless, social institutions should be striving for debate, as you would put it, anyhow, even knowing that humans are flawed. So I think it's really sad to simplify my feelings on that.
It's interesting because we're seeing a lot of the critical theory, and that's being pushed more and more. And to me, critical to the first word alone. So you're going to be criticized, and much of the the critique is like on America, specifically the New York Times with their 1619 project, saying that America started in 1619, not in 1607 with the first colony of Jamestown, but rather when the first slave was taken against their will and taken to the colonies, that this was the first starting and how America was founded on slavery. And that they're really taking big talks at America that were just fundamentally at our core problematic and deeply racist, deeply problematic. And my question to you is, what's the view in Jamaica? How do Jamaicans like generally view the United States?
Yeah, that sounds strange to me, what you just said. I don't know the details of that, but just going off of what you just told me, most countries, not most Western, not most, a lot of Western countries had colonies and participated in slavery, and also slavery also existed in Africa, and slavery wasn't just done by Europeans, but there was the Arab slave trade prior to European colonization of Africa. So I think if they're trying to claim that the fact that slavery occurred means that the country was founded on slavery, then you would kind of have to say that for a lot of other places in the world. I think that growing up in Jamaica, my view of the US was pretty superficial, actually. Growing up, it was mostly about people going abroad, making lots of money, and sending barrels down, which is sending clothes down. So I didn't really think about the politics of it at all. But I have very much come to understand a lot of what I would consider what the U.S. is more founded on, which is an experiment in freedom in terms of freedom from the government. And with freedom comes certain responsibilities. But I think of small government and certain rights that other countries don't have, such as the right to bear arms. I know people argue over that, and also free speech. So that's what I think of. And I think this is something that just doesn't make sense to me. Claiming that America is like a super racist place, it just doesn't make any sense, because these things that they're trying to stain the history of America with exist a lot of other places in the world. So I just think that doesn't really make much sense.
Yeah, I agree. I think that to me it seems like such a almost self-serving and myopic and maybe even like a haughty view of America, that we're going to look at through the lens of me, right? Like instead of thinking about that they in the Middle East, in Asia, that you see this all over the place. You know, the Arab slave trade is huge. I mean, is racism against blacks any different when it happens from an Arab versus a white person? I don't think so. I mean, slavery is bad, and this is getting past it was good, right? Then ultimately we fighting a civil war over this, and really it's not over states' rights. The civil war becomes over slavery. We didn't make the right choice at the beginning, but morality evolves, I think, much like technology, right? Do you blame the person that lived in 2000 BC that they don't have iron, that they're still in the Bronze Age, and that they don't have computers? We don't, but why blame their morality? Like, the morality evolves over time. So I just don't think that we can look and judge America now by the morality standards that existed in, say, 1776. What are your thoughts?
I agree with that you can't judge America off to the America um off the past. I do agree with that.
Right. So one of the things is that when we're talking about, we get back to the like self-censorship, and we had a problem with this at our event. Like it seems like if we would have talked about music.
Sorry. Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to add a thought. Just could you come back to the self-censorship and the event?
Yeah,
Just what
no
you
problem.
were just talking about. I just wanted to say that I think that America, the U.S., is coming out of they're learning to deal with their history. And I think because you were mentioning the Arab slave trade, I think the transatlantic slave trade was the more recent one. And so it's as if it's the wounds are continually being dug up. I think in a manipulative way. I think it's the logic that people use, such as what we were just describing, where I said I don't think it makes sense to blame America when all the other countries did it, or to claim that this is something unique to the U.S. But I do think that it's because the U.S., as I understand it, is struggling with coming to grips, I guess, with its past. And I think that the people who have the ability to influence the narrative of how the collective psyche in the country um, tells its story to itself, I think they're not doing a good job of it. And I think they're actually being manipulative because they realize what gets people going, what makes people angry, where the hurt is. And I think they're manipulating people basically. So I just wanted to say that.
No, that's actually I think a thoughtful analysis that they're poking at a wound, because it is our history, right? And if you're going to say that you're a proud American or a patriot, you're kind of accepting that America is generally good, and you're taking it all the way back to 1776, which means you're going to cover a heck of a lot of slavery, a lot of Jim Crow, and other times of things like separate but equal being the law of the land from the Supreme Court. There's a lot of ugliness along with the good there. So do you feel like that they're picking on this on purpose? It seems like to me that if I had to steelman the position over there, I would say that, yeah, it is good to know. It is good to stress that there were a number of minorities, and those women didn't have the vote. Certainly slavery, but the Chinese weren't complete citizens either. So even though they were enslaved, there's a heck of a lot of discrimination against Italians and the Irish, Catholics. I mean, a lot of discrimination, a lot of bad things going on. That we should be talking about kind of the ugliness, but I just don't think that means that the entire American experiment and dream is forever tainted.
I agree with that. I mean, growing up in Jamaica, we learned about colonization and slave trade and slave rebellions and what happened afterwards, and indentured servants that came over. We have all of that also. All of that also exists in the Jamaican history, and it wasn't something that I was shielded from at all. But you don't use that to guilt people in the present. And like I said, I think it's the people in power who are able to shape the narrative are not doing a good job, because, like you said, there were tons of other groups that came to the U.S. who weren't treated well, and it's almost as if their struggle is sort of ignored. And I think it's hard to weigh and measure struggle, but that's exactly what the people who push these narratives do, where they only focus on, say, slavery against Black people in the U.S. I don't like the term African American. That's probably not the popular opinion. So I think it's about how you decide to tell the story. And to tell the story means telling it in the full truth, which means not just focusing on one narrow aspect of it and saying it in only one specific way in terms of who is the victim. Because it was actually very complicated. It wasn't just like what I hear a lot was like all white people treated all Black people bad. No, there were white people who were oftentimes punished because they were helping Black people. And it was more about the state enforcing things. So it's a very complex story, and it has to be told in its entire complexity for it to be the truth.
No, I think that's a really good point. Bringing that up, it seems like when and I'm fine to talk about inequities, like in even reparations to a degree. I think that if you can actually pin back a person that's maybe older that couldn't get a house from Jim Crow and was redlined and did lose a certain amount of money, that individually you could make a case for certain people for reparations. This was definitely the case when we did pay back some of the Japanese Americans that were interned after World War II, because they were forced to sell their property at pennies on the dollar. So ultimately they did have a cause for reparations. Now those people were alive and it had just happened, but it's difficult for me to want to justify who gets reparations for things that happened many, many generations ago, and no one's alive.
I'm not a fan of reparations, but I don't really feel like I'm qualified to speak on this subject. I do think that the people who incur a debt must be the actual individual people, and the people who are owed the debt must be the actual individual people. So that's kind of to simplify my position, but I'm definitely not a fan of I'm not a fan of the government sort of transferring wealth between from one person to the other anyway without their consent. So I'm just not a fan.
Yeah, one of the weird terms that you see a lot is equity these days, and it doesn't mean like how much money you actually have in your home anymore. It means like what's the state of equality, and they're looking at, say, like incomes. Is there equity in income between, say, white Americans and minority Americans? And it really depends on what group you look at, right? If you
Right.
if you look at, Asian Americans are doing better, but then if you count different kinds, and so really it matters a lot, depending on like specific race and specific creed, and a whole host of other things. You would think that newer immigrants too, from Mexicans, like coming over in your first generation, you're likely to be less rich, but you will get there over time. But equity, we're seeing Chicago recently hired a chief equity officer. And this is happening in
Oh wow.
some
Really?
other countries. Yeah. So some people say, well, this stuff's just on the campuses. It's not going to escape, but we are seeing it like pop into there. And so Lori Lightfoot hired Candace Moore as the chief equity officer. And what their focus is, and then I'll see if I can quote her. Part of any racial equity work is understanding our history and how we got here. Chicago is very much a tale of two cities, so it's about support all aspects of government and understanding, learning from our history, and set a goal for something different. So it really is. It's interesting how we're trying to kind of make up for the history, set a goal for something different. And to me, yeah, I want to uplift people, especially that are poor, but there doesn't seem to be much of a plan, and it very much does focus on the past. What are your thoughts on when you're talking about equity?
I think that looking at statistical outcomes in terms of certain populations groups, certain populations within the rest of the population, such as if you classify them by race or by gender or by ethnicity, is usually, again, not being complex enough. Um, the biggest thing that I often see is that they only look at specific racial categories, mainly meaning black, white, Hispanic, and then they ignore all the ones that sort of change the way that you see the data. Um, I would also say that they often don't I forgot the control for certain attributes that a person may have. For example, when they talk about income, they don't talk about the kind of education that someone received. One of my videos, like 2 years ago now, was talking about how a lot of blacks in the U.S. were educated, but their um, education wasn't in degrees that tended to give high-paying jobs. So some people would make the argument that, well, these two groups, meaning like blacks and whites, have the same level of education, but they're not achieving the same income. So there's some discrimination going on here. But if you look further, if you look at the kind of degrees that people are getting, they're not the same in terms of their ability to provide economic value and be rewarded with lots of money. Like thinking more like engineering versus like a humanities degrees. So you see that happen a lot when people are talking about I think that that would be the biggest thing, and I'm in favor of equality in terms of process and not equality in terms of outcomes, because I also don't think that humans are we don't all have the same attributes. I think if you want to help people, then it's okay to do that in a way that doesn't um, that you where you actually learn from your history, as that woman was saying, and you don't now discriminate against this group of people because you're trying to correct the past. Like you can't make a right with two wrongs. And I would also say something else that I don't like is that people these, say, for example, chief equity officers want to look at the outcome, but not at the earlier stages of the issue, such as like your household environment or things that we know affect an individual's probability of being successful in the future. There are schools that I'm a very big fan of it ever since reading about, I think it was the KIPP schools, KIPP, like Thomas Sowell talked about. I also follow someone on Twitter. Her name's Catherine Belting, I think that's how she pronounced her name, who I really admire because they're implementing schools. So you're kind of treating the issue at the root. You can't affect someone's family system. Like the fatherless homes thing is a big issue. This is an effect that's seen all over the world. Where if the father isn't present, then that has a very big impact on, say, sexual promiscuity in females when they're too young, and then also not great anger management in young men. And then it also influences everything else like poverty in life. And so there are schools that maybe you can't help with the family situation, but when you provide a structured environment, they see the results that this really helps. And for some reason, many people just seem to want to completely ignore it. You want to focus more on, say, discriminating against other people, but not trying to fix the outcomes, the end result, and not necessarily things that people know can work. And I don't like that because
Yeah.
there are ways that we can solve the situation that don't involve discriminating against other people.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree that looking at outcomes to measure how well you're doing, I think is okay. To see if outcomes are the same completely, then maybe whatever you're doing, whatever your process is, maybe you didn't have any effect. So I think it's fine as a measurement tool, but to say that it's the goal is really weird because I agree. What you talked about was improving equality of opportunity and making that equal. Because if you have somebody that's in a middle class suburb that's just average America and they're going to get a reasonably decent high school education versus somebody that's going to an inner city school that is not doing well, that doesn't have very good teachers, you can't really do a lot of classwork there. The culture's terrible. What are you going to do if you're worried about like getting beat up at school or worried about things like gangs? You're not concentrating on your algebra. So getting that, raising the equality of opportunity, especially for the people on the bottom, that should be a big focus. And I would be all supporting that. But it just seems like everything's tailored to outcomes. She said, again, this is the chief equity officer in Chicago. What are outcomes? What are the outcomes we are producing? And are they fair for our city and for our residents? If they are not, what are we going to do differently and increase fairness and equity? So to me, this is looking, instead of using that as a tool to see have we increased equality of opportunity, it's equity and making everybody equal seems to be the goal. Well, we can make everybody dirt poor and equal. Like, that's not a good result. Now, I'm assuming she doesn't want that, but it seems like, why aren't we trying to uplift the poor as opposed to make people equal?
Well, I would just agree with what you said. I don't know if it's that people really think that this will solve the problem and like they don't realize the negative effects this can have by looking at other places in the world where people have gone with this sort of mindset of fixing the end results. And I think that's tyrannical. You're trying to control the outcome of individual decisions that people make all throughout their life. So if you're trying to set what the bar is going to be like, that means you're basically imposing control because you're not controlling what's happening underneath there with people making their decisions all the time. And so they're going to get different results depending on what they do. I think that's a path to tyranny. And I guess what I was trying to say is I don't know if it's really coming from like a lack of understanding of how that can end badly or what, but I agree with you. I think that's not good and that you should more be focusing on the equality of opportunity, as you put it.
I think it's the lens that always this social justice lens, the specific lens of inequity, the lens of critical theory is always being applied. And I think there's times that that lens is useful, right? There might be a specific instance where a particular entity has systemic problems, maybe with racism or sexism or what have you. I mean, you can see that, but as if you're always looking for it, you're always going to see it. And then pretty soon, when you take this to its extreme, then you'll see that white dogs being racist to black dogs or something. That your lens will get so skewed.
Well, I don't know. I think it's a little bit obvious. I remember someone told me that this was just propaganda because there were going to be nominations soon. But I watched that Ruth Bader, I forget her last name.
Ginsburg?
The Supreme.
Ginsburg.
Say it again.
Ginsburg?
Gainsbourg. I watched her documentary and I was impressed. Like there were very clear laws that she helped to overturn that stopped women from working in certain industries. Those things are very clear. What a lot of people talk about today in terms of like some kind of ism, it's not so clear. It's looking from the outside, sometimes fabricating, sometimes I guess it could be true what people are thinking inside themselves in terms of if they're sexist or racist or whatever. And I think that's very different from very clear laws that everyone can say, yes, this is bad. And yes, this is discrimination. So I think that has really shifted. And now we're kind of just starting to fabricate things where it doesn't necessarily exist.
Okay. I think you're right that we're seeing things. I think it's good to go after discrimination. I think that there's positive elements to all this. I don't say that the social justice warriors don't have a kernel of truth to some of what they say. It's some of the overkill that seems to bug me, and in some of the consequences that we see. And one of them, like you said, is self-censorship. So is that why you went to the Minds IRL event? Is that a place that you felt like you could speak, or why did you decide to go?
I decided to go because I had gone like a week and a half, 2 weeks before to the International Conference on Men's Issues, and I was a speaker there and a panelist, and I was interacting with a lot of the speakers and panelists, and there was some overlap, and a lot of people were talking about going to the Minds in Real Life event. I had heard about the Minds in Real Life event before, and I had wanted to go, but sorry, did you say something?
No, I'm just listening.
I had wanted to go, but I didn't make up my mind to go until I realized that it was only one day because I thought it was going to be another 3-day conference and I was starting school soon. And I was like, I don't have time for this. So I went because I was already sort of in that scene of people who were talking about things that maybe they had received a lot of backlash for speaking about. So I was already in a part of that crowd, and then I knew about this other event that was happening, and I thought it might be good for me to go because that's the kind of thing I'm into.
Yeah. Did you have fun? How would you describe your experience?
It was great. It's really nice to interact with people who you jive with. Now, there are definitely people that I didn't agree with that I met. But we were all there because we wanted to talk. And that in and of itself was a common grounding for everyone there. And when you leave a place like that where, say, in the rest of the world, you're not necessarily able to have that sort of acceptance, you're energized from it. So I had a very good time. I didn't get to see that speech. I'm very bad with names. With
Daryl Davis?
Daryl, yes. I don't remember his last name. I didn't get to see it, but I heard it made some people cry. And I know a bit. And I think that the goal to dialogue instead of something to try and help with the polarization, maybe it's just the first step maybe it won't go exactly how you want it to, especially because the media keeps smearing these kinds of events when people try to do it. But I think it's quite admirable, and I'm glad to have attended. I really hope to see more events like that. I really hope for people to be able to talk about politics. Like there are videos that you can see in the past from American television where people debate things in a civil manner, and that wouldn't happen today. They just be called names.
Right.
So
I just
I'm glad to see people doing that.
the way you express that there used to be a time in America, maybe in the 80s or 90s, where people could do this. It's funny because the good old days, right? I mean, politics in America has always been kind of a brutal game, but right now we're throwing mustard, we're heaving mustard gas at us and at each other, and we need to get back to the knife fight. You know, I mean, it's okay for it to get a little rough and tumble, but it is what they call toxic these days, and Twitter isn't the best medium for it. This is why I tend to like the real life events, because you don't know who you're talking to, and there is a diverse group that we're not just getting people on the right, you're getting people on the left, you're getting people in the center, and then you'll get a number of people that hold disparate views that are very left on some things and right on the others. So you just don't know who you're talking to by looking at them. So when you find out that you are talking to a progressive and maybe you were right leaning, wow, that can change your opinion. You're much more likely to hear something and to actually get to to learn something.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was just thinking while you were talking that I think the level of polarization that I've seen in my almost decade here, like I've really seen it ramp up, and I haven't even been here that long, has to do with the belief in, okay, from the perspective of someone who's not on the left, I would call it self-righteousness. But I would say from the perspective of someone who is on the extreme left, in the strength of their morality blinds people to the other side. So I think if people could remember that the people that they think are so evil would, like, say, go adopt a puppy from a shelter or something, if they can remember, that they do good things and good acts in the world, that can help.
Yeah, and I think the extremists in any direction can get that. I mean, there was a 700 Club. I mean, it's 9/11 today, and when the towers came down on the 700 Club, there was a couple of the preachers there saying, "I think this is a curse from God, maybe because of the gays," and you think, I mean, that was actually said in 2001, right? That's only 18 years ago. And that was actually said out loud on national TV. So, this talk about having your blinders on, when the first thing you think of is, in a terror talk, instead of thinking terrorists that hate America, you might think that it's a curse from God because of a group that you think is immoral. Yeah, that's the kind of, I think, political extremism that you're talking about. Am I right?
Yeah, you're correct, and I do think that kind of extremism can tip in any direction. It's just where it's coming from currently. Yeah. I think any political viewpoint can get that sort of tyrannical bent to it.
What do you think about this? It's part of what I think is polarizing it too, is not just extremists, but also people that are generally close to the middle. Maybe they're somewhere in the, if 0 is a centrist and 100 and -100 are extremists. People that are at 50 or -50, I think, are really getting hopped up. And here's a post on Twitter from Amy Siskind, who's got a couple 100,000 followers, who's it says activist, feminist, author, podcast of the Weekly List, Politico 50, and some others. So has a pretty big following. This tweet got 6,800 likes, and it's Donald Trump joking around about a third term, or 2024. And she says, these stories about Trump never leaving office are now coming out more than once a week. He is normalized. He is not joking either, folks. He is consolidating power, and he does not plan to leave. Believe what he is repeatedly saying. So, I mean, this is somebody that's reasonably, you've got a big following. People are thinking, well, he's not going to leave. Like, even if Biden wins or Warren wins, that he's not going to leave, that this is the first steps to dictatorship. I mean, yeah, you're going to be on edge. I don't believe that. I don't think Trump would know how to do a coup. And guess what? You'd need the military. I don't think the military is going to hang on to Trump. If he refuses to leave the White House, I think they're going to Secret Service toss him out in his ear. But do you think that kind of thing, and I don't mean to blame specifically Amy, but I'm just bringing it up as one example of fear mongering, and the right can do the same thing. That that media, instead of like calling it straight, is just scaring people, because that's what it brings it in, and you just stare and you're like, oh my God, imagine a future if that happened. It's my guess that scare tactics in the media are jacking this up. I don't, it's just a hunch, but what do you think?
I definitely think that the media has a large role to play in that. And I don't know how you change that except for trying to appeal to individual people within the media. Because it's again, people deciding to act in a certain way. I do think that this is in some ways simplifying what I think is the cause of some of this escalation. But I think that if people in the U.S. had a common threat that they could all bond together on, that would really help. And then also, I think that people are very comfortable. They have a lot of time on their hands, and I think that's actually causing a lot of this polarization and the time and the energy to be able to complain about everything that's going wrong in the world. And I'm not saying it's not wrong to focus on trying to fix things, but I really think that a lot of the political climate today has to do with people being very comfortable and very well off and having a lot of time on their hands. I really think so.
That's a good point. Yeah, and that's probably a lot of times the class on Twitter. Right. If you're really, really in trouble and starving, you're probably not firing out troll tweets to people you don't like.
Yeah, like I said, I think that people are looking for something to do, and they're finding. Oh, actually, something else I would say too is that everyone is externalizing their issues. I do think that this comes. I sound so much like I don't like the left, but I do think that this comes from the whole victim narratives that sort of exist today. I think that a lot of people are looking to find peace in their lives by fixing everything on the outside and not necessarily focusing on what might be troubling them inside. That's something else I would say.
That's interesting. Do you subscribe to like the theory that as religiosity declines, that people are substituting it with something else, things like politics or other kind of political ideology?
I do think so, because from what I understand, being religious is sort of core, like a basic part of being human. Like we search for that kind of meaning. So I do think so. Yes.
Are you religious?
I'm not. I am agnostic. I grew up religious. I pray sometimes, but I'm also very scientific, and it's like I don't have enough evidence, but I hope that there's more. But I consider myself agnostic.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. And sometimes, like, I don't know what people are always talking about when they say spiritual, right? I mean, I know a good time when I see one, and I guess that's some of the closest I get is, all those people that showed up at the Minds IRL event and maybe at the IMCI event too, like there are people, there's media that's walking around, that's potentially trying to catch people doing something. There's deplatforming events. Yet everybody there is willing to share ideas. No, there wasn't a lot of people, screaming mad about what happened. They were just happy to be there, and just the event kind of took place as if the protesters weren't there. It was weird seeing, our minority people at the after party go in and be called white supremacists. That was odd, but again, not much actually happened.
It really makes me wonder about a lot of the coverage that I see, because these two events were two like decided the political events that I'd gone to rather than just hearing about it and knowing how they just like made up a whole narrative. It was as if the event never even needed to happen. They just needed something to be happening, and then they could write the story, and they already had the story planned out, and it almost didn't really have anything to do with what was happening. That makes me wonder about a lot of what I see on the news because I was actually at, like, say, these two events, and for the ICMI one, people were calling the hotel. I briefly spoke about it in a recap video I did, but I think that the receptionist at the desk I almost saw her demeanor towards me shift, and I think it was because of the calls that she was receiving. And it seems as if people just fabricate a narrative and they just use these events to continue it. So I go into these events now and haven't seen what it's really like. I wonder about the news that I see.
Yeah. I saw your video on that, and you're talking about the men's right, the men's rights activists or
right.
the convention, ICMI.
It was similar.
Interesting. Okay. Because then you were there, and also the person at the front desk was like wanted to glimpse in to see, and that's interesting. Did you see that at the mines? Did anyone like in security had asked? Because we talked to the security people that kept saying, yeah, we heard that there was a weird event going on here, and then the ones that were actually inside were saying, oh my God, I really like this. I don't understand why it's not controversial. I mean, this is pretty interesting. I wish I could ask a question. So,
no, yeah, I think it was similar for both of them. And something else that I would say too is it's almost as if who is discussing the topics matters, because I could say that people could be having the exact same discussions, but if it's coming from someone who say writes from the New York Times, like just discussing it, then it's okay. But if you're discussing it and your position on it is not the right position, then it's not okay anymore. Yeah. So I think I see that pattern also.
And what I think another troubling pattern is, and sometimes you do see that, but more if we have, say, a Sargon of Akkad, or if we have a Lauren Chen or somebody else, like even a Rucka Ali, who is like an Ayn Rand type objectivist, but he makes kind of obnoxious videos, for fun, that the person from the New York Times won't come because they call it the one drop rule. If you have one drop of somebody else in there, it pollutes it. So now we can't get them. And then you get it skewed, because I would love to have as much as I do think the New York Times is a bit biased, I would love to have their opinion there. But I think it's unfortunate that sometimes if you're bringing people that are also on the right, now it scares people.
Yeah, I think that's not a great way to go about living in a society. I recognize that we're tribal, and I recognize that if you believe in a certain thing, and if you really believe that the people on the other side are destroying your society, then you don't want to be interacting with them, and you want to keep away from them. But I would say that it's an illusion that the people on the other side are trying to destroy your society, and they're the same people that you grew up with. They probably had different experiences. I mean, there's some evidence that some of people's political persuasions is due to genetics. It's innate. I consider it to be normal that you would have people who a sort of divide in society. I think that it helps with balance. You have the two sides talking to each other, and then that's how you move forward. I think it's normal. So I don't know what the solution is. I guess these events, like say the Minds in Real Life events. But I don't think that's a great way to go about living in a society, by like ostracizing yourself or ostracizing other people because they will violate the one drop rule, and you can't talk to them because they're on the other side of the political aisle.
Yeah. There was a Native American, old adage that, that there's a little boy that's being, chased by like an enemy tribe, and he gets to a small stream, and he waits because he sees an alligator. It's dark. He sees an alligator like in the stream, so he won't cross it. But then it eventually gets caught. But it turns out when he gets caught at noon that that was a log and not an alligator. And the idea is like, don't, it might be a log. It's not necessarily an alligator. And I think that's what you're what you're talking about. To not necessarily see all these people as the decay of the society. These people aren't going to lead to the downfall of your culture. Yeah, that I think we're seeing alligators where there's logs, and I think that for us, the only thing we can do is live by example, and that's why we're holding the events, is to try to open it up. I mean, how much of a ore do we have in the cultural soup? That's hard to say, but I think living by example is what you do, and this is what parents do, right? I mean, you can't parent the whole United States or the whole country. You can only do it to your family. So, that's what you're trying to do, is like, we'll do what we think is the best, and let's see what other people do. We hope that other organizations pop up and do the same thing. That'd be great.
Yeah, I agree. I think understanding that we're going to fight and debate, you have a structure. That's why we have like the courts and the legal systems and how the governments are set up. It's like you have a structure to your fights. You have a structure to the fight that you expect will always be there.
That's a good point. Yeah, and some keeping the same rules. So, I mean, I really appreciate your perspective. Your videos were really good. Check it out. It's Desi-Rae on YouTube. I listened to a whole host of these today, and it was a lot of fun. That's how I got a little bit of your story. They're worth checking out, because it's good to see sometimes somebody that gets America but didn't grow up in America. So there's certain cultural biases that you won't have, and to get your perspective, I just you're fun to listen to. You have an easy voice, and I binge watched 10 of your videos and loved it.
That's great. Yeah, when you told me you watched like 10 to 12, I was like, wow, that's a lot. I'm flattered. Thank you for watching.
No, you're welcome. And we really appreciate you coming on and to kind of share your perspective and talk, and did some good insights. I appreciate it. And thanks everyone that donated to our GoFundMe for our crowdfund. We really, really appreciate that. And everyone that came to the event, the tickets aren't exactly cheap at $130, $150. So we appreciate everyone hanging in there, also dealing with the venue changes and so on and so forth. We can get there, but we kind of have to stay the course, and but also, you've got to teach people how to treat you. And that's kind of what we're doing a little bit with the theater, is if you have been wronged, then, we can take some action. But still, the goal hasn't changed. The goal isn't to punish anyone so much as create dialogue. And Desi-Rae, we really think that you're part of that, and really kind of appreciate what you're saying. And I just love your tagline. Oh my God, what am I doing? There's a braveness in being able to do what you're doing, and to take the risk of blowback, to just be honest.
Yeah, I'm definitely glad that I'm doing it. I think I sort of stumbled into it due to just like my personality traits, but it's been a couple years now, and I have more clarity in it as I'm doing it.
That's awesome. Well, I'll continue to watch, and we really appreciate you guys talking. Thanks so much for giving me an hour.
Thank you also.
All right.